It's 6 p.m. on a Tuesday here in Korea. Welcome to our newscast. I'm Daniel Che. Let's start with the headlines. President Park Geun-hye takes over a cabinet meeting to push for the passage of long-pending anti-terrorism legislation, saying Korea is not exempt from possible terrorist attacks. Ahead of a state funeral for the late President Kim Il-sung, crowds continue to pay their respects at over 180 public altars set up across the nation, while lawmakers head to a memorial at the National Assembly. France stationed an aircraft carrier in the Mediterranean to carry out airstrikes on ISIS facilities, while its president continues to seek greater global support in destroying the terrorist threat. President Park Geun-hye convened an urgent cabinet meeting on Tuesday, urging the parliament to pass pending anti-terrorism legislation and the Korea-China FTA. She also had some harsh words about a massive anti-government rally held in central Seoul earlier this month, calling it illegal and violent. Park Ji-won starts us off.
Tuesday's cabinet meeting was originally scheduled to be presided over by Prime Minister Hwang Kyo-ahn, but the meeting location was changed at the last minute to the president's office and chaired by President Park Geun-hye herself. The president, who recently wrapped up a 10-day tour for a string of multilateral summit meetings that ended up being dominated by the Paris terror attack, said she had taken the action to address the threat of terrorism. She said Korea is not a safe zone where terrorism is concerned and called on the government to strengthen the nation's readiness for any potential threats. She urged lawmakers to pass several anti-terrorism bills currently pending in the Parliamentary Intelligence Committee, some of which have been pending for more than a decade. The bills were originally introduced in response to the 9/11 terror attack in the U.S. in 2001. Since then, they've been stalled due to disputes among lawmakers about the expanded role outlined for the nation's spy agency. The president also called on the assembly to ratify the Korea-China FTA and other economy-related bills, including those related to labor reform and the service industry, in order to revive the ailing economy. President Park also has sharp criticism for lawmakers, accusing them of neglecting their parliamentary duties. She also expressed her discontent with a massive rally held in central Seoul earlier this month. An estimated 70,000 people from roughly 50 groups joined the rally to protest the administration's policies. Calling the rally illegal and violent, she said protesters were attempting to paralyze the government and circumvent the rule of law, and demanded stern punishments for all illegal acts committed during the event. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
The entire country continues to mourn the death of former President Kim Il-sung, who will be laid to rest after a state funeral on Thursday. Shin Se-min gives us a glimpse of the funeral preparations and the altars that have been set up around the country.
One by one, mourners lay flowers before a memorial portrait of the late President Kim Il-sung. It's a similar scene at roughly 188 altars set up around the country as citizens stop by to pay tribute to the late leader.
Thinking of him comforts me. I miss him as someone who once led our country.
Here, and I'm bringing the condolences on behalf of the British people to the people of Korea for the loss of somebody who was a great patriot and a great democrat.
He contributed greatly to social welfare and helped make our lives better, so I admire him.
It's the third day of a national 5-day mourning period for the late president, regarded as an icon of Korea's democratization movement in the 1980s, who laid the groundwork for a transition from dictatorship to democracy. Across the country, Korean flags have been lowered to half-staff, and the government has asked all public servants to wear black ties at public events in a show of respect. At the National Assembly, preparations are underway for a state funeral scheduled for Thursday. The organizing committee, headed by Prime Minister Hwang Kyo-ahn, is composed of over 2,200 funeral commissioners, and the list of advisors includes former Presidents Chun Do-hwan, Do Tae-woo, and UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. The funeral procession will start at the National Assembly, and the late president will be laid to rest at the National Cemetery in Dongjaku District, southern Seoul. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, lawmakers paid tribute to the late President Kim Il-sung at a ceremony in front of the National Assembly on Tuesday. Kim Young-gil shows us how rival politicians came together to honor the man who changed Korean politics.
Flowers decorate a memorial altar set up in front of the National Assembly to honor the late President Kim Il-sung. The offerings were presented by lawmakers at a ceremony on Tuesday to honor the late president's contributions to the country. After the event, the floor leader of the ruling Saenuri Party praised the late president for his efforts toward democracy.
Our lawmakers have come here to honor President Kim Il-sung, who also has roots in our party. He fought for Korea's democratization and spearheaded a variety of reforms for Korea's future.
The floor leader said his party would honor Kim's legacy by bringing about reforms to unite the country and win the hearts and minds of the people. The main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy party said it would remember late Kim as a trailblazer in Korea's democratization movement.
Former President Kim Il-sung fought against authoritarian leaders like Park Geun-hye and Chun Doo-hwan. During his presidency, he broke up a key military faction and led reforms aimed at increasing the level of transparency in financial transactions.
The lawmaker added his party would do everything it can to end the long cycle of inequality between the haves and have-nots and bring harmony to the nation. Flags have been flying at half-mast to honor the late president, and the National Assembly is preparing for a state funeral that will take place here on Thursday. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
Korea's household debt in the third quarter grew at its fastest pace since the fourth quarter of 2002, when related records were first compiled. The Bank of Korea says the amount of debt, including purchases on credit, stood at around $1 trillion as of the end of the third quarter, up roughly $30 billion from the previous quarter. The central bank adds, however, that the record growth came from an increase in spending as purchases on credit, including credit card bills, shot up by more than $3 billion, while the growth of household loans slowed in the July to September period from the quarter before. The growth of mortgage loans also slowed in the third quarter, but rose by roughly $17 billion. Korea's shipbuilding giants have found themselves in choppy waters in recent months, posting eye-watering losses on the back of delayed constructions and canceled orders. In an attempt to steady their respective ships, the so-called Big Three are engaging in aggressive cost-cutting measures. Kim Min-ji reports.
There will be no massive restructuring. The nation's big three shipbuilders say they will try to maintain their labor pool as much as possible and instead cut jobs and salaries at the boardroom level. According to industry sources, Daewoo Shipbuilding and Marine Engineering, Hyundai Heavy Industries, and Samsung Heavy Industries are tightening their belts, but non-executive employees shouldn't be affected. Among other steps, Daewoo Shipbuilding plans to sell non-core assets and cut down on material costs in return for $3.6 billion from its creditors. The company has also laid off 30% of its executives and cut the remaining executive salaries by between 10 to 20%. It has also accepted voluntary retirement for 300 executives. Hyundai Heavy Industries is also cutting costs across all units for the first time. Presidents from all arms will not be accepting their salaries, while executives have seen their wages cut by up to 50% and 10% for directors in its shipbuilding-related arms. It has suspended unnecessary training and event programs until it turns a profit, and it will also reduce the number of new hires. The same goes for Samsung Heavy Industries. It has cut executives by 30% and says the company will accept voluntary resignations but carry on with new hiring plans as scheduled. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Total sales from Korean companies last year dropped by 1.2% from the previous year, marking the first fall since related data was first compiled in 2006. According to Statistics Korea, sales figures from some 12,000 firms, not including finance and insurance companies, amounted to just over $1.9 trillion, down $22.5 billion from the year 2013. The agency says the weak figure was a result of sluggish exports that led to a plunge in sales in the manufacturing sector. Turning our sights to the renewed fight against terrorism in the wake of the attacks in Paris, France has begun launching missions against the Islamic State group from its aircraft carrier in the Mediterranean Sea. The airstrikes come as the French president attempts to drum up more international support for his country's war against the extremist group. Son Jung-in gives us the latest.
The chief of France's armed forces says the nation launched airstrikes on Monday against Islamic State targets in the Iraqi cities of Ramadi and Mosul. The French military also carried out several bombing missions over Syria shortly after the strikes. These are the first airstrikes since France increased its military capacity by deploying the Charles de Gaulle aircraft carrier into position in the eastern Mediterranean. France plans more strikes on the terror group's command and recruitment centers and oil facilities following President François Hollande's vow to intensify its campaign against the group responsible for the deadly attacks in Paris.
We will intensify our strikes and choose targets that inflict the maximum possible damage on this terrorist army.
Hollande was speaking alongside British Prime Minister David Cameron, who offered his support, including the use of a British airbase in Cyprus. They also agreed to step up cooperation in sharing intelligence and airline records. France is coordinating with Moscow via the U.S. coalition to avoid crossing paths with Russian jets that have increased attacks in Syria. Moscow's defense ministry said its warplanes had hit more than 470 targets in Syria over the past 2 days, including tanker trucks and oil infrastructure in territory occupied by ISIS. Hollande plans to seek more international support when he meets with his counterparts in Washington and Moscow this week. Son Jung-in, Arirang News.
Facebook, a convenient means of gaining support or sympathy from friends and peers, it can also be used to gauge popularity based on the number of likes you get on a post. But the more networked you are on Facebook, the higher levels of stress you may have. Oh Si-young shares with us the side effects of that popular social networking site.
Most of us feel a sense of satisfaction every time someone likes our status on Facebook. Feeling connected and appreciated by our peers is perhaps what makes social media a daily addiction for so many.
We post a lot of pictures to share with our friends and get more likes.
I go on Facebook about 5 times a day, and when someone likes my post, I feel connected to them and, in a way, accepted by them.
That may be true for a lot of us, but a recent study shows that the more Facebook friends you have, the more stressful it could be, especially for younger people. Canadian researchers at the University of Montreal measured the levels of cortisol, the so-called stress hormone, of 88 teenage Facebook users. It found that those with more than 300 Facebook friends had higher cortisol levels. While the heightened stress levels weren't attributed entirely to Facebook, the report showed that the popular social network was responsible for 8% of the increased stress. And higher stress levels are known to increase the risk of depression, among other problems.
To cope with stress, our bodies produce the hormone cortisol, which stimulates glucose production. If stress levels stay high for a long period of time, this can lead to a weakened immune system and obesity.
But the study also shows that cortisol levels go down when you like a friend's status or send them an encouraging message. So instead of checking the number of likes you get on a post every 10 minutes, you might want to go out of your way to give others a thumbs up instead. Oh Si-young, Arirang News.
And that brings us to the end of our newscast. As always, thank you for watching.